When it comes to 1990s Nickelodeon, I have to admit that I'm a little bit biased, because that is what I grew up on. I had way too much access to television while I was a kid. And whenever I went over to my grandmother's house, which I was over there quite a bit, all I did was watch the TV. I mean, from the moment I got in the door to the moment that I went home. So trust me, I spent most of that time watching Nickelodeon, specifically in the 90s. And when I went back to watch most of those shows and Paramount Plus kept, trying to blast and give out their subscription, I have to admit, it didn't hit the same. Now that I'm married with kids in my 30s and have spent some time as an English teacher, I've come to realize that nothing happens in television that is an accident. Remember, these are writers. We are watching a script. Children are not making the television programs. Adults are writing them. Everything that is in there is strategic. If we're talking about a cartoon, this is art. You don't accidentally draw something with your pen or with your pencil. It's all in there on purpose. So the real question is, what were we watching and what were they trying to tell us? I have to admit that I am coming from a Christian context. When I look back on all of 90s Nickelodeon, and hey, if you're here on this video and didn't watch part 1, shout out to you. Because I went through 1990 to 1995, and from this point on, I'm just gonna keep on running through the 90s. From 1995 on down. This video is likely going to be followed up by one that goes into 2000s, and I'm probably gonna have to break that one up into 2 halves as well. But fundamentally, 1990s Nickelodeon is not what I remembered, especially when I thought critically, because kids don't really know what to focus on. It would actually be the adults in the room who would be able to figure out what is really being said or being, angled towards, hinted at whenever a show is actually on. But Nickelodeon figured out, and I've already addressed this in my first video, in the early 90s, they had concluded, parents don't know what their kids are watching. Everything from the show Are You Afraid of the Dark, when then launching Schnick, all of these things were based on the pretense that parents don't know what their kids are watching. We're just gonna give the kids what they want, regardless of what their parents want them to watch. See the difference? Remember, they're basically gonna give the kids candy, cake, cookies, and pizza. Just keep doing it over and over again. A little bit of candy is fine, in moderation, but kids like me were binge watching television. I didn't even know that was a thing at the moment, but I guess that's what was happening, at least when I went to grandma's house. So I'm just gonna hop right in and start this timeline. For full disclosure, I basically just went to IMDb, looked at the most popular shows that they had in the 90s, and when I looked at the list of the top 15 or so shows, broke them up and put them in timeline order, and I started figuring out what were we actually watching in every single one of them. So here we go. In my last video, I already addressed all of that. And I'm not gonna say everything I went over there, but all that was a bomb that went off in the 90s that basically set us down a course for the remainder of Nickelodeon's tenure. This was all that. This is what it was. And we watched it. We found it entertaining. But remember, the cable era was something different. Kids did not really have the same amount of choices they do now. For that matter, parents didn't. Either you were gonna watch Nickelodeon, to some degree later on, you were either gonna watch Disney Channel or Cartoon Network, and that's about it, at least when it comes to kids' television in the middle of the day. So when all that shows up, again, it draws the ratings because of the shock value. And once that bomb goes off, that is it. Nickelodeon now knows the future of the channel is set, because if this works, what else is gonna work? But while all that was starting to take off, in 1996, Hey Arnold was released on Nickelodeon. Not gonna waste your time with this. Everybody knows Arnold is the main character, the football head, his best friend is Gerald, Helga Pataki has, a crush on him, but she doesn't tell him. It's kind of like a running joke for the entire show. She's like, pining away in her, love shrine. Again, we bring up, the concept of shrine. It's almost like worship, which is very problematic in and of itself, but it is what it is. But Arnold himself, and they get into it later on in the concept of the plot, but he doesn't have parents. Now, a lot of the characters around him technically do, but Arnold does not have parents, or at least they're not present. He is living with his grandparents. He is a 4th grader. He's 9 years old, and he's living in a city that is in some way resemblant of New York City. Maybe not exactly, but resembles it, because he takes public transit, buses, and trains, and he's more or less just kind of living his life at 9 years old with a whole lot of freedom. To the point where I remember being a child, and I'm starting to think, how come I don't have the freedom to take the public bus, or take the train, or go here and get into all this? Because he's really out here. Most of the plots only work just on the pretense that he is out and about without any parental guidance, which is a running theme that Nickelodeon continued to push. the idea of either neutralizing parents, figuring out a way to remove them entirely, or misrepresenting them. If you think about the other characters who have parents in the show, I mean, Gerald seemingly had a decent family at home between his parents, like the father and the mother. But then you go to Helga Pataki. Her parents are problematic. We have a father who's more concerned about his work than anything else. He has one daughter who's seemingly perfect, and that ain't Helga. I mean, he's pretty clearly playing favorites. You have a mother who's like checked out in the marriage. She's more or less like the joke. Like if you're an adult watching it, it's pretty clear that she's like some form of a functioning alcoholic. But they can't say that because it's a kid's show. Like this is what we're watching. And remember, anytime you have children who are watching representations like this, it's one thing if the parents are in the room. Nickelodeon is getting away with this under the pretense that the parents aren't really paying attention. But when it comes to any dark humor, any sexual innuendo, things like that play into the cartoon, which Hey Arnold maybe wasn't the most chronic with this. When we get to the back half of the 90s, there's one show in particular that you cannot ignore. But Arnold even lives in a boarding house, so even that part was a little weird to me, where he's exposed to all these other adults who live in this framework, so it's not like a traditional family home. And there are plot lines that run off with these people, in a bunch of different directions. I mean, there are moments where you see some cross-dressing. Like there's a character, Mr. Wynn. There's an episode where, there's a Romeo and Juliet scene, and he's really pressed to play Juliet. Again, this is an image that kids are receiving, even if it's in a cartoon. But to be real with you, as big as Hey Arnold might be, the year 1996 is still much more about Kenan and Kel. Now, when I say those names, most people will remember the song, Oh, Here It Goes, and I'm one of them, because I did watch Kenan and Kel while it was on. Like, in the 90s, I am watching it live, but at that time, I'm like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Let's clarify, I'm young. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. I'm Ezra Garnett, and if you really want to know the truth about the hidden messages behind nostalgic TV, then you are in the right place. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section, because I try to read them all. Kenan and Kel, this is how I understand it. For the most part, we don't really see Kel's parents. They're really just not reflected in the plot. Kenan and Kel are always presented as the acting tandem, as a comedy duo. And I'm not here to say they aren't funny. There's a lot of slapstick humor, which I guess is fine enough. But the plots of the shows and then the structure of it, because Kenan comes from a family that is a typical family, the 2.5 kids, in this case it's 2, him and a younger sister. But this is the moment in television where, as far as I'm concerned, Nickelodeon decided they were going to turn the parents into buffoons. It's not the last time, but it's probably the most pronounced. Kenan and Kel, because Kel, we don't really see his parents. Kenan's parents are there, but they're not providing any guidance at all. They're incredibly out of touch, offer very little value. There are moments when they just have to be clueless in the situation in order for things to kind of play out the way that they do. I mean, yes, it's comedy. I totally get that. But the message is now being sent that parents are out of touch. They are irrelevant. You don't need them. You might even know more than they do. But here's the catch. It's a comedy because Kenan and Kel just get into a whole bunch of wild hijinks. And even that's putting it mildly. The plot structure, go back and watch a Kenan and Kel episode. The plot ends up in so many random places. Offhead, I remember Kenan ending up in a donut shop, him and Kel, that he's trying to do something with a donut or make a special donut. Somehow something goes wrong with the donut machine. They end up creating this super large donut and getting stuck in it. How that happens, hard to explain, but Drake and Josh, which I'll get to in another video, did some version of this with sushi. That I do remember. But even another thing, I remember there was something where Kenan has, a crush on the daughter of his father's work boss. And here's the thing, we see his father, talking very inappropriately, maybe not cursing per se, but just making a lot of wild, outlandish statements about his boss. He ends up on record, somehow Kenan records a voice note. This is, like a voice recording. This is back when people still had landlines. And it gets sent over to the boss because he was trying to call the girl to ask her out on a date. So he ended up breaking into the boss's house. You see what I'm saying? They're breaking and entering. And it wasn't like it was an accident in any small form. He tried to get in that house. And it was all about getting in there to, erase the message. Eventually the family comes back. Again, there's a whole bunch of crazy things that go down. But if you understand, again, breaking and entering, I mean, you have the misrepresentation of the father in this episode with his language, which is setting a terrible example for the children. I mean, at least he's present in this episode doing something, because there's some where he's more or less a ghost. Generally speaking, Kenan and Kel, if you really watch it, remember, consider watching this as a child without parental guidance. That is the important part. What are you really consuming? And what are you going to take away? Because kids don't know what to focus on. Like, don't give us that much credit. When I'm 6 and 7 years old, I'm finding it all entertaining for what it is. But I don't know what to talk about. And the needle is once again being pushed. And because of what they did with the parents in Kenan and Kel, it makes the 2000s era, when I finally get there, it's like it clarifies a whole lot of things. Because parents go from being neutralized to being made into idiots to eventually just getting rid of them in the show entirely. We don't need parents anymore. Kids can raise themselves, they'll be fine. And after Kenan and Kel, I do have to admit that Nickelodeon really coasted through the remainder of the 90s, for the most part, on Nicktoons. I mean, again, that's the phrase that they coined, and I remember it, so I'm just going to call them Nicktoons instead of just cartoons for the purpose of argument. The Angry Beavers dropped in 1997, and I do remember that moment. I do remember watching it. I think their names were, Daggett and Norbert. Why they chose those names, I'm pretty sure there's some reason that goes beyond me. And the show's premise, interestingly enough, because this is aimed towards kids, is you have these two beavers who are brothers who are trying to live a bachelor lifestyle. Again, bachelor lifestyle. Like when you are a child, you're talking about being an adult living as a bachelor or whatever that means. You see how that's a very detached narrative from someone like myself, if I'm just thinking about the average kid 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But hey, this is what they chose to put out there. There's a whole bunch we could say about the Angry Beavers, because if you actually watch it, you'll see that there's still a lot of that same energy. If you remember Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life, which I covered in part 1, both of those have adult humor, adult situations to some degree, sexual innuendo, dark humor, satire, violence, all of that is showing up. And the Angry Beavers is not a whole lot different from that. That's still in there. And if you understand the history of that show specifically, I guess just bullet point note, censorship was actually a pretty big part of the experience for the writers. Because there's what they wanted to do, and then there's what the Nickelodeon executives let them do. Just let that sink in for a moment. Because with everything I've covered, already in this video, but specifically in the first part, from, a network that started off in the 80s, based around a show called You Can't Do That on Television. There was a Nickelodeon executive who more or less held the writers at bay because they felt like their creativity was being stifled by this executive. There was actual discussion about, are they going to do some form of cross-dressing with the characters? Again, they're cartoon beavers, but still. And the executive said, no, we're not doing that. And they kind of felt frustrated that was shut down. Obviously, if you're someone coming from a Christian context like myself, exposing children to those types of images is problematic. But more importantly, the executive felt the same way. He's like, hey, let's not confuse the little children. That is what he's on record saying. Don't confuse the kids. The censorship even extended to things like just the use of the word shut up and so on and so forth in the way the characters interacted. I don't know anybody who had it on their top rung, and the show didn't really run that long either. I mean, it ran for a few years, but nothing compared to some of the other heavy hitters that Nickelodeon came up with in the 90s. So, the Angry Beavers, yeah, that happened. But in 1998, they had another cartoon where, depending on how you look at it, maybe they got it right. Because CatDog drops in 1998, and that thing runs for almost 5, 6, 7 years. Like, it runs well into the 2000s. CatDog. Most people just remember the dog and the cat that are appendaged together. Which, if you're an adult who's looking at it, you can already process, how does this work anatomically? It may be a cartoon, but basic biology does apply here. And that's seemingly non-existent. So that was actually one of the controversies around the show. Just the baseline of the dog and the cat being pasted together. But on a deeper level, CatDog does have a lot of Ren and Stimpy energy. I keep progressing back to that because those are the shows that came in the early 90s with adult humor, satire, violence, dark humor, all of these things that were sexual innuendo. CatDog puts a lot of that same energy out there. Again, it runs longer. I think the cat and the dog together is just way more memorable from a cartoon perspective. And yeah, the comedy, it's there and it's tended to be funny. But here's the thing about CatDog. CatDog stands out. And it stands out for a very specific reason. Because there were scenes from the show that were considered to be very disturbing. Specifically for adults, not even just for the kids. Remember, the kids aren't going to go picketing about it because they don't know what to focus on. They're just accepting this, as entertainment. And because it's on, it must be all right. Again, it's aimed for the kids. But okay, one of the scenes that seemingly was real problematic was where, dog was eating, the dog part of the CatDog was eating trash. And while he's eating a bunch of garbage, it makes him sick in such a way where it messes up the cat and, his teeth fall out. Then there's like a flesh-eating monster that, gets involved and, comes for the cat. Like, these images were considered disturbing by the adults who would watch the show if they were in the room with their children. CatDog, are you starting to see the issue? I'm not here to attack for every show from my childhood and perhaps even yours and call it bad. But I like to think of this, and I'll probably go back to this a little bit later, as some version of a death by 1,000 cuts, where each of these shows and a lot of the images that are presented by itself might be okay. But imagine a child who is watching a lot of this programming consistently without parental guidance. But hey, moving on, because the Wild Thornberrys dropped in 1998. And before I go any further, I need to point out that the Wild Thornberrys was technically supposed to be an adult animated sitcom. They just did some product testing and realized that it was going to work better with the kid market, so that's exactly where they took it. Eliza is the main character, and the show revolves on her ability to talk to animals. Now, she's not born with this ability. It comes from a shaman. Again, if you're someone coming from a Christian context, they're introducing these ideas, these imagery of, like the magical power that comes from this shaman that gives her the ability to talk to animals. I'm not saying that you can't watch the show and that it might not be okay in theory, but if, again, imagine a child watching this without any parental guidance. Again, this imagery, these ideas being floated. If you just look at the characters, there's a talking monkey. And granted, the monkey talks to Eliza because she can talk to the animals. But the monkey's name is Darwin. If you know anything about the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin, they made the monkey named Darwin. That's not a big leap. And then you end up with Donnie, who's the adopted, boy to the family. He was raised by orangutans. So it's kind of like some Tarzan type of energy. So he's always, babbling and talking all type of crazy. It feels like you're almost giving us like the evolved monkey and then the caveman boy character. Like, that's kind of what you're giving us just between those two. Again, Eliza's the one that, talking to the animals. And then you move on to Eliza's parents, who are, filmmakers doing these, like National Geographic style documentaries and traveling. And that's kind of, the premise for the show and how she's engaged, Eliza specifically, is engaging with all these animals. So they're more concerned with that, which is why she's off on the deep end, involved with the animals and dealing with the hippos and the lions and everything else. Snakes, like all of that is represented. I'm not even really dealing with the humor itself. Remember, this is an adult animated cartoon that got brought down to the level of kids. So I don't even need to explain much about the type of jokes that might show up, considering what would slip through the cracks when you try to peel back the layers on what the show actually is. And if you actually saw the show, then you should remember there's one more character that I conveniently left out until this moment. Debbie is Eliza's sister. Now, she's supposed to be a normal teenager. She wants to, be in, normal society, hang out, go to concerts, listen to rock music. She had ripped jeans and things like that. Like, okay, that is what it is. Because you have this, opposite character to Eliza who's all about the nature and all about being with the animals, quite literally. But just look at the artwork that is Debbie Thornberry. You have a young lady, teenager, who's portrayed with a midriff, and clearly, she has a very sizable chest that protrudes out, for lack of a better term. It might be a cartoon, but why are we doing this? Again, imagine 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe 9. Why is this the image that we need to keep giving them? Somebody had it in their minds, because remember, this is a cartoon. You could have drew that character any way you wanted. They chose to draw that character that particular way. According to my research, there was apparently an unaired episode where Eliza and the monkey, Darwin, that's her, monkey pet or what have you, that there was some form of a romantic thing going on between them, and they develop or get into some form of relationship. Again, it was an unaired episode that pointed towards, I'm not going to go down that path, but you get the idea about the type of idea, the type of thing they were trying to express or that might have been portrayed to the kids if that episode did go to air. You can see why it didn't. But the writers made it. So that means they're pointing in that direction before the episode drops, because that's just how you do it. But imagine binge watching this show repeatedly with no parental guidance. And after everything I just said, I am aware that there's one show that I cannot end this video without giving its just due. So it's time for us to address the Spongebob Squarepants situation. The show dropped in 1999. It ran for like 16 seasons making new episodes. It's the giant of a cartoon that Nickelodeon came up with. I don't think they ever expected SpongeBob would be this big a phenomenon, because it ran out of the 90s, through the 2000s, and then into the 2010s. SpongeBob Squarepants is a big deal. Now, this is not intended to be a history lesson. I'm actually focusing on the imagery. But SpongeBob Squarepants wasn't even supposed to be his original name. It was supposed to be SpongeBoy, and apparently that thing was incorporated or was taken in some form, so they ended up coming up with SpongeBob Squarepants. I'm just going to throw this out there. His name is Spongebob Squarepants. That's his name. And he lives in Bikini Bottom. Think about that. Remember, if you're an adult out there. And after that, we find out that he has a friend named Sandy Cheeks. Once again, if you're an adult, you can figure this one out. And he works with, what's the name of the guy? At the restaurant? Mr. Krabs. Sexual innuendo, my friends. SpongeBob Squarepants. So I don't have to break down too much. That adult humor, all of that is going to show up in SpongeBob Squarepants. Honestly, SpongeBob Squarepants the show, it's almost like hitting the jackpot on everything they've been trying to do with these other characters. It all started back with Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, which I'm gonna flag Rocko for this reason, because although both of those shows had the adult humor, dark humor, satire, violence, all of that in there, targeted towards kids as basically adult animated shows that were retooled for the kid market. Rocko's Modern Life had a writer who became incredibly central to SpongeBob. It just is what it is. So there's a clear carryover with that energy. The difference is that SpongeBob Squarepants becomes non-threatening. They made the character himself incredibly naive. So as a result, it makes him, cute, makes him cuddly. It makes it way easier to sell this product to the young child market and to make it passable to parents. So I think SpongeBob sends this, this image of safety and fun and lightheartedness. That's more or less the taste that people had in their mouths after watching a SpongeBob Squarepants episode. But there's still a lot of adult content as far as, the satire, the jokes, the innuendo, all of that is in there. It's just under a layer that makes it harder to just initially see. And I've always wondered how they even came up with the concept of SpongeBob Squarepants anyway. They were trying to develop something that was the weirdest sea creature they could ever come up with, and they just moved towards this idea of a talking sponge. Went from a sea creature all the way down to a talking sponge. Hey, it is what it is. Now, there's always been some form of controversy around SpongeBob Squarepants. Always. And some of that has, been related to, I guess the term sexuality would apply and so on. Now, coming from somebody who has Christian values, is rooted in that faith. Where I stand isn't all that important. Let's just deal with the facts. SpongeBob Squarepants in Season 2 had an episode where him and Patrick, who was supposed to be his friend, like a very close friend in the show, they are adopting and raising a baby clam together. And when they do, SpongeBob is doing so under the role of the mother and Patrick as the father. Now, his name is SpongeBob. That's the name. And I said he because I think everybody else agrees that when you see Bob, you assume a particular gender. Where you stand on these issues is not what I'm here to talk about. Let's just deal with the facts. Emphasis on Bob and Patrick in Season 2 are raising a clam together. And you can understand why this episode was considered controversial even when it dropped. And Steven Hillenburg, I believe he's, one of the, the primary, creators of the show. He gave a defense saying that, a sponge is neither male or female. That was supposed to refute the idea that this type of relationship was a, same gender, situation or what have you. That was his thought process. But again, regardless of where you stand on the issues, let's just look at the facts one more time. When questioned about whether or not SpongeBob and Patrick are in a relationship that goes against what people understand to be, male-female dynamics. Again, just dealing with the facts. The response given by the creator of the show was that SpongeBob is neither male or female. Considering we are in the year 2025, whichever way you land on that, it's still pretty clear what idea they're trying to express. Let's just assume that the creator is 100% on base. He's neither male nor female, so it's not a he. It's a they. If that's the case, we're still introducing these ideas to the children. Now, you can do it. I'm not here to tell people what they can and cannot do. But parents, if they're not in the room, don't really know what the kid is watching. These ideas are traveling and they're circulating forward. I've already addressed the innuendo. Some of it is baked into the names. If it's baked into the names of the characters, obviously those jokes are going to circulate at different points in the show. Other popular controversies for SpongeBob, which I think become controversies because the show is just so wildly popular. They did an episode where they were essentially making fun of cursing, which the thought process that it kind of, trivializes it, makes it seem that for young children, that cursing is okay, it's something to laugh at, it's something funny. So, hey, there's that part. And I remember that episode pretty vividly. And then you have the other concept where they make some, satirical jokes about society. One episode where they were kind of making fun of the food stamps program and things like that, apparently. So depending on how you feel about that, that can, send a particular message to young people about how they should feel about, those who are in poverty. At the end of the day, SpongeBob was a big hit. It was probably the biggest hit that Nickelodeon ever had. You could call it a grand slam if you want. And SpongeBob is 1999. Like, it helps launch them into the 2000s. Because I could have tacked SpongeBob onto 2000, real fine if I did it on another video. But because he drops in 1999, SpongeBob, whatever. Because SpongeBob drops at that time, it puts us in a position where now you can see where the 2000s are going to go. Nickelodeon in the 90s is not exactly what I remembered. I watched the shows. I enjoyed most of them, or at least I thought I did. But when I went back to watch them as an adult, they don't hit the same. I'm going to return to this statement, death by 1,000 cuts, that if your goal is to raise a child who is, going to develop into somebody who is, a hardworking, functional member of society, especially under the context of somebody who might get married, have a family, and if we think about Christian values and specifically, the God of the Bible, just consider what show from Nickelodeon in the 90s, especially of the prominent shows that we've discussed, whether within this video or even in part 1, if you go back to it, hey, truly appreciate it. If you didn't see it, you decide to go back, it means a whole lot to me. What show would you recommend if the goal is to help positively move the needle forward on that end? I get it, shows have to have issues, plots, and drama. That's not what we're saying. But which show do you think is positively moving the needle in that direction? Because if you have a different goal, a different agenda, a different focus point on what you think life should be and how someone should live it, these shows move the needle in a different direction, but it may not be the one that you had hoped. I am not actually trying to suggest that Nickelodeon ruined an entire generation. And for the record, I am a part of the millennial generation, so if I say anything about them, I'm speaking about myself. What I am pointing out is that Nickelodeon knew exactly what they were doing. They had writers and showrunners and everything else who are adults. They were trying to make programs for children under the pretense to give the kids what they thought kids would want, even if it wasn't what their parents wanted them to be exposed to. And they felt they could get away with it because the parents did not know what their kids were watching. I didn't say it. Nickelodeon executive said it himself, and you can even go back to the documentary The Orange Years, which I think is available on Tubi if you really want to stream it for yourself. Hey, not my words. Take it from them. And although a television show on Nickelodeon is just supposed to be children's entertainment, that does not mean that it can't be sophisticated. Because if the goal was to move the needle, specifically on the millennial generation, as far as I can tell looking around the world right now, mission accomplished. If you actually made it all the way to the end of this video, I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if anything that I said at all actually connected with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.